often my work has really been a territory, or been an exploration of the territory of the human brain. And I think we often hear that phrase, you know, he or she is just not good at that, whatever that might be. And I really think if we can understand more about the workings of our brain, we can have more compassionate insight into the functioning of ourselves and of other people. And if we think about our brain, we can't really escape it. We carry it with us everywhere we go. And it's incredibly complex, and it filters our perceptions and understanding of ourselves, of other people, of our world, and our relationship to that world. So it's pretty critical in terms of our everyday functioning. And science has taught us that, you know, our brain really has a significant role in shaping who we uniquely are. And if we think about its complexity, there's something on the order, rough magnitude, of 86 billion neurons in our brain. And if we think about the world's population at 7 to 8 billion, again, it puts it into perspective in terms of its complexity. And again, there's several hundred trillion connections in the human brain. And again, just to roughly put that into perspective, I mean, it's not completely accurate, but there are more connections, or at least equal number, to all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And to me, what's really fascinating is no two brains are exactly identical. If we think about, you know, the person sitting next to us or somebody we know really well, and we think about the physical differences between us, you know, shape of our eyes, our nose, color of our eyes, there are actually more differences between our two brains than those physical characteristics. So simply put, our brain does have a critical role in shaping who we are. But to me, what's so promising is this concept of neuroplasticity. So not only does our brain shape us, but we know that on a regular basis, we are shaping our brain. Our brain is changing. It changes at a physiological level. We know that there's neurogenesis, that, you know, new neurons get born in the hippocampus. We know that dendrites get created, which allow for more synapses, which allow for more connections in the brain. Research has shown we can increase neurotransmitters, glia cells. So the brain can change physiologically as a result of enrichment, as a result of stimulation, which has the potential to lead to positive changes in learning. For me, what's promising is that there's neuroplasticity across our lifespan. I mean, there's definitely individual variability in plasticity. I've worked with individuals that look really identical, same age, same gender, same cognitive profile, work the same amount. Well, they both make progress, but one moves 3 times faster than the other, which would suggest, and research is suggesting, that there are individual variation in neuroplasticity, which makes sense because there's individual variation in pretty much everything. But what's promising to me is there's neuroplasticity across the lifespan, especially as I'm getting older. It's encouraging that, you know, my brain is still capable of change. I've worked with people as young as 5 and as old as 81, and certainly the experience in my work is that 81-year-old made the same progress as a 15-year-old. So my story begins with personal discovery, you know, trying to understand what made me the way I was and what wasn't working. And it's also universal in that each one of us has a brain and our own unique cognitive profile that again, can give us some insight into our functioning. So if you think about having a brain that's capable and incapable at the same time, that is an experience, or is the experience of somebody with learning difficulties, and it certainly was my experience. There were certain things I could do very well, and there were other things with the best will in the world were either extremely difficult or in some cases really quite impossible. So for me, growing up, I lived in a world that was incredibly confusing and incomprehensible. At the time, obviously I didn't know that there was something not working properly in my brain. I just knew that learning was an incredible struggle. So I struggled to process and understand language. And if we think about Lewis Carroll's poem, The Jabberwocky, to me, this was what the world was like. Incredibly confusing. I could hear the words, but I really struggled to attach meaning to what I was hearing or what I was reading. And for me, too, I couldn't tell time. I couldn't grasp the relationship between the hour hand and the minute hand. It just didn't make sense to me. I couldn't reason logically. So making decisions was really, really hard, because when you make a decision, you have to weigh and contrast information. You have to sort of see alternatives and decide what is the best alternative in that situation. I would become paralyzed. For me, it was like being that deer in the proverbial headlights. I was frozen most of the time. I began to be labeled in school as rigid and as stubborn. And I was rigid and I was stubborn, but it wasn't coming from an emotional place. It was cognitive. It was so hard for me to understand my world that if I did get some glimmer of understanding, I wanted to hold on to it for dear life. And if somebody said, well, you should look at this alternative or think about a different way, it actually felt to me like an assault or an attack, because I'd have to let go of what I'd come to grasp to integrate that other information, and I truly could not do that. Relationships, something as simple as a fraction. I mean, I could understand 1 because I could line up 1 object and see it very concretely. I could understand 4 because I could line up 4 objects. But as soon as you put that 1 over a 4, it meant nothing to me because it was a relationship of a part to a whole, and there were no relationships in my world. Even in language, I couldn't understand how my aunt could also be my mother's sister. It made no sense to me how somebody could have 2 relationships. So my thinking was incredibly concrete, and my notebooks were filled with diagrams because I drew pictures to try to understand language.